A lot of the opportunities will come out of this. There'll be tons of new companies starting. It may just be a situation now where you're going to step out of a big company and go and work for a little company, and you will love it. I promise you, in terms of that, I find working for a small company is so much more interesting than working for a big company. Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This video is going to be all around industries that are heavily affected by a recession, particularly by the last recession and previous recessions. There's some normalities that go on that essentially repeat themselves, which is why some industries more than others, particularly in the stock market, have had bigger hits than others. I picked out 3 industries, but as you'll see, those 3 industries tend to have a domino effect with other industries, which we'll get into as we go on. So obviously, disclaimer at the beginning, I'm not an economist. You should go, after this video, go and check out other people's videos or online resources to learn more about it. All I want to do is set a foundation and some basic principles. I'm a big believer in KISS, which is keep it simple, stupid, which just basically means that if you can have a fundamental or basic understanding of something, it's much easier to then go on and learn a lot more about something. So I'll be drawing on a lot of my own experiences of the last recession, and essentially I put this video together because I've had a lot of questions from friends, family, and also from subscribers and people emailing me to do this type of video and what the sort of future potentially holds, which nobody knows. No one knows what's going to happen, and I seriously do not get stressed about what's going to happen. Whatever's going to happen will happen, and we'll all deal with it individually when we get there. This video is just going to set around some of the things that happened last time, some of my experiences with it, and talk about the industries that get most impacted by it. So let's jump into it. Before we get started, it's important for people to understand what recession is, because for a lot of you it will be your first recession. Now, I've picked out something that I thought was a really good synopsis of it, not the most technical description, but one that is really easy to understand. So I'll read it out and we'll put it out over the screen, and probably put over the top as well a graph of what's happened over the last 4 recessions, dating back to the 1980s. A recession is a period in the business cycle when economic activities are in general decline, typically accompanied by elevated unemployment, falling income and consumer spending, rising business failures and falling stock markets. Scary and unpleasant as they are, recessions are a normal occurrence in the modern economy. The only thing I'd add on top of that is that for a recession to be official, essentially the economy has to be in decline for 2 quarters in a row, which is a 6-month period. So we won't know for a number of months whether we've hit a recession or not. But you'll see a lot of top economists at the minute that aren't arguing over whether we're going to have a recession or not. They're arguing over how long the recession is actually going to last. So for example, the last recession lasted about 18 months. But as we'll get into this later, some industries essentially last a lot longer than that period, and some may be actually quicker than that period. So the economy itself is what judges a recession, but different industries get affected by the recession, which we'll get into. So one of the things I want to focus on within that definition is consumer spending. Now, consumer spending is the backbone, essentially, of the whole economy. I think it makes up something like 2/3 of the economy and how it essentially functions. Now, consumer spending is just like us going to the shops, spending money, our gym memberships, those types of things. Now, what's really important about this is that when a recession comes, the news and the media in general, they obviously worked out a very long time ago that negativity sells for them and works for them and gets us to click and gets us to watch. Now, it's so important for everybody that is not affected by a recession that they keep on spending as they normally would. The reason for this is that if you start curbing your spending because you're reading the news thinking, oh, the world's going to end, but you're not actually impacted by what's going on, you're going to make the recession a lot worse and last a lot longer. Now, if you are affected by it, obviously you have to do what you've got to do. You've got to make ends meet, which is perfectly fine. But what you don't want to do is what I just said, in terms of that it's business as usual for you. You haven't been affected. You might even be working for a company that actually gets an opportunity come out of a recession. Like if I use Amazon, for example, and everything that's currently going on with lockdown, is that typically Amazon would spend millions trying to acquire new members and customers. But because of what's going on, obviously tons more people than ever before are using home deliveries. So Amazon would have been gaining thousands, hundreds of thousands of new customers without actually having to spend a single penny in acquiring them. They're going to benefit off of this type of situation, as are a lot of home delivery companies. So there will be opportunities to come out of it, and there will be people that just won't be affected by the recession and won't really see the downside of things that go on. Now, for those people, it's so important to keep spending going as normal. And for anybody that doesn't really take a blip, please keep going as usual. And also, don't take advice from people that are absolutely stupid on the topic or it's way outside of their comfort zone. I saw a video recently of True Geordie talking about Mike Ashley and how much he essentially hates the guy. Now, him having an opinion on Mike Ashley from a Newcastle owner perspective, completely fine. I appreciate that Mike Ashley hasn't won over any fans. There's no harm in debating that. I think anyone that buys a football club is obviously open themselves up for having debate about them, having opinions on them. But one of the stupid things that he said was to his audience, and he's got a very big audience. He told all of his audience not to spend any money in Sports Direct, which is so reckless, it's unbelievable.
I do brand deals every now and then. We're going to do an anti-brand deal right now. Don't shop at Sports Direct, ever.
Like, to put that into perspective, they employ about 27,000 people, which is roughly the same number of people that Lehman Brothers employed when they went under. Which is, so he essentially, because of his hate of a Newcastle owner and because of the way that he does business, he's essentially quite happy to advertise the fact that, let's curb spending at Sports Direct and for 27,000 people to go out of business. Do not listen to people like that. Honestly, a recession is one of these situations where it's a bit of all for one and one for all. Like, you're going to have to club together and we're all going to have to help each other out, which is why I go back to the point, if you're not affected, you've got to keep your spending going. And don't be put off in terms of, and this goes both ways, don't be put off in terms of that you want to buy a new car but your neighbour isn't doing so well, so you don't want to upset them or a friend. Like, it's important, and they will understand in terms of that if you decide not to do things as normal, you're only going to be putting other people out of business. So let's jump into the first industry, and the industry that I know most about, which is the construction industry. So when you Google the industries most affected by the last recession, construction related industries will take up 4 of that top 10. And this is an industry that I work within, and the one that I can give the most insight into and the most examples of what I went through in the last recession. In general, the construction industry has a reputation of one of the first industries into a recession and one of the last out, which is why in the beginning when I said the last recession, it says that it lasted 18 months, but I can tell you that anybody in construction will say that it lasted a lot longer than that. It probably felt more like 2 to 3 years, to be honest. Now, to give a real life example of things that happened in the recession, is that if I use the high-end market as an example, which is an industry I used to work in, which was sort of, for want of a better word and ease of explaining it, that we would renovate sort of multi-millionaires' houses. So that industry is the first industry that essentially topples and goes down the pan. Now, the reason for that is that in situations like has just happened, the stock market has crashed. A lot of those guys and girls have lost millions, if not tens of millions. So they are obviously not going to spend millions renovating their houses, which basically has a domino effect in terms of that anybody that was about to work on that on a project like that would immediately have been shut off. So this is something that actually happened to us in last recession. So we were due to start a basement and a complete refurbishment of a large house in Holland Park in London. The guy whose house it was one of the chief guys at Lehman Brothers. Christian was actually responsible for saving a lot of jobs. So where I think a lot of people like to place blame in terms of what serves him right, Christian wasn't a part. You got to understand that within any company, it's always a portion of the company rather than the whole company that brings something down. And Christian's got a really good name within the industry, and from my experience of the interactions I've had with him, he's a really nice guy. And I think if you sort of Google him, he's got a great reputation, and he did an amazing job of saving thousands of people's jobs, of getting that his side of the business purchased, like the European arm, purchased by another bank. I can vividly remember going to a meeting with him after he'd just been able to save that side of the business, and obviously it's unbelievably like dark days. He looked exhausted. We were exhausted at the time because you're bidding for work left, right and centre in terms of the hope that you can keep everything going. He was really good. He sort of talked through the meeting. We went through the budget. It was a bit more than he'd expected, but obviously you have guesstimates, and by the time you start working things through, obviously you know the client. It wasn't a million miles away, but at the end of it all, he was obviously telling us that he was shelving the project for the foreseeable future. That project never came off for us, but the domino effect is that for us, in terms of that would have been 2 years work, and probably would have seen us through the majority of the recession. Like, another knock-on effect of that is that not long after that meeting, we had to let go a member of staff. I mean, I went to uni with her. That was an incredibly difficult situation to face and to go through, particularly when you're friends. I don't know if it makes it any easier if you're not friends, but it definitely sort of added salt to the wound. We kept going for a little while longer, but it wasn't soon after that we went out of business as well. And that's the sort of example of the domino effect that happens. So any companies that operate in that type of industry, like interior designers, some architects only do those types of projects, same with some engineers, that side of the market will be one of the first to get hit. We've got two friends that are interior designers. One has essentially been let go already. The other one has had two projects shelved, and I'm sure that within the next few weeks they're going to start having to cut back and look at how they're going to function going forward. The high-end industry altogether, it doesn't really matter in terms of whether it's in construction or outside of construction. Top stuff, people are ultimately going to be saving money. People will be losing jobs or have lost a lot of money in the stock market, so they're going to curb their spending, and luxuries are one of the first things to go. So that's examples of the high-end residential market. But the low-end residential market, if you think that's not going to be hit, you're mistaken. So one of the first things that's happened so far is that Nationwide, as an example, have frozen all new mortgage applications. They've essentially put a blanket statement out that says something along the lines of, we're focusing our attentions on existing customers, i.e. people that are finding it difficult to pay their mortgages, existing applicants. So if you've already been approved, they're saying that they'll stick by that. And they're saying that the only new applications that they'll look at are people with 25% or higher deposits, which from their point of view is the safest people. But from Nationwide's point of view, it's obviously, if something was to happen to that customer, so they've got a 25% deposit or equity in their property, it basically means if something did happen to them in the future, that they were unable to pay their bills and Nationwide had to foreclose on them, then they know that the market's not going to dip that badly, it's not going to drop 25%, so they'll still be able to sell the property and get their money back. Nationwide and all the banks will 100% be buying their time at the minute to review their application process. They're 100% going to change their requirements. It's definitely going to get more stringent to get a mortgage. Whether things like 5% mortgages are going to exist after this, that was one of the first things that went in the last recession. 5% mortgages were a thing of the past almost overnight. It was a 10% minimum. The other thing with banks, which is going a little bit off topic, but you'll see quite quickly, is that credit card allowances will be cut almost immediately. To do with exposure, obviously, the banks, you have to remember that, a bit like I was explaining earlier, in terms of that they know that they want to keep business as usual because they know that keeps the economy ticking. But the other side of things is that they obviously have to protect themselves and protect everybody that has accounts with them. I think everyone saw that with the last recession. I think that there was this misconstrued opinion of banks that if your money was in a bank, it was safe and you couldn't lose it. Now, I can't remember exactly what the figure is. I'll do some research afterwards and I'll put it below as I'm talking. But essentially, banks will only guarantee your money up to something like £50,000. So if you've got more than that in the bank, essentially, if the bank was to go, you would lose all of that money, because banks do what other people do. I mean, every person in advice you've ever heard, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's your parents, friends. Always tells you, oh, don't put your money in the bank. It doesn't earn any interest. Well, banks obviously do the same thing. They invest everywhere. And this is the other thing that goes on for developers. Developers are highly leveraged by banks and investment funds. That's where all their money, the majority of their money comes from. They're generally quite cash poor companies. They're forever churning over developments and investing that money into the next one to keep growing and growing and growing. A bit like a government. A government essentially can only benefit by growing and growing and growing, but like by a nation growing, because spending goes up, jobs go up. It needs the growth, and that's actually what development companies do. They essentially keep attempting to grow and reinvest in the cash that they do generate from projects into the next project. So basically what you've got is this real domino effect taking place. You've got developers struggling to get investors for any land that they currently have going forward. So they've got essentially millions in assets that they can't develop out. You've then got their existing developments struggling to sell because people would have lost their jobs. Mortgage lenders like Nationwide and others now having a lot more stringent mortgage applications, which means there's just not many people to buy. So their cash flow is knackered because there's just not money coming in, which is what every business does. They forecast their cash flow coming in, and obviously now there's no cash coming in to them. So it's going to be extremely difficult for developers, and you will see a lot of developers go in the recession. It happened in the last recession, and every single recession before. My granddad got taken by a recession. Obviously, I said we got taken by the last recession, and that's what happens in terms of the most businesses. And you'll see this in the news a lot at the minute in terms of the people focusing on this company just released that they made 50 million in profit, and now they're not paying their suppliers. But the reason for that is that people get so obsessed with a big monetary number, and the media know this, but so many people fail to actually look at what that was in terms of margin. Like as a margin, that may have only been 5%, and that 50 million may actually only keep the business going for 6 weeks. Now, obviously, we're potentially, at the moment, we're not gone past that point in lockdown, but we potentially could. That business where everyone's like, oh, the big guys are raking it in, that's just not true. Just a bit of advice, do your research. Anytime you see things like that the media do, have a look and see what that actually was as a percentage in terms of profit, because the likelihood is that they employ thousands of people, and it actually isn't that much enough money to keep that company running, particularly when it's not being able to get any sales in. So I hope in what I've explained you can see the domino effect that takes place with developers, that they struggle for funding, the funders look elsewhere for more secure investments, they struggle to sell their existing units, they obviously have to take a cut on the prices, which essentially means that they make a loss, and that they essentially get tied up, which is why a lot of developers do go in recessions. Now, I focus a lot on the residential market because that's something that I focus on, but this will be the same for loads of other companies as well. Give an example, if you think about a company may have just been thinking about expanding, building a new HQ, with everything that's going on, going back to the cash flow, they've looked at projections that the business was going to grow say 10, 20, 30% next year, and they were going to need a new space to move into. Well, with everything that's going on, they're going to cut that off, which means that, much like the example I gave of ourselves with the guy at Lehman, a contractor that's in the commercial space, which would have won that contract to build out their new office space, has no longer got it. So using someone like Christian Guzman as an example, he's literally about 2 months into his construction of his new HQ, and it's a massive, I think it's like a 30-acre estate. I'll overlay some images of it so you can see it, but if he knew what was happening now was going to happen, he 100% would have pressed the stop button on it to wait to see what was going to happen, because he would have bought that building probably for quite a big discount on what he's paid for it. Obviously construction costs will drop, and now he's in a situation where he's spending the most amount of money he's ever spent, but also got the least amount of income coming into his business that he's ever had, because of shipping issues, because of it's very hard to get deliveries, and obviously people are losing their jobs left, right and centre. So that's a prime example of what will go on in terms of the people that are, say, 6 months behind him in that process, where they've earmarked that they're going to need a new facility, and now will absolutely shelve those projects, which means there's just not going to be as many projects in the construction industry going forward. So focus on another point within construction is that you have a lot of industries within industries, which basically means that if I use residential as an example, you have new build and refurbishment. The guys that tend to work on those projects are actually different. Even though 90-95% of the trades that work on them are the same, they actually tend to be different people in terms of subcontractors that work on those two projects tend to be different subcontractors that they specialize on one over the other, the project managers, all those types of things. There are a few people that overlay, obviously ground workers can easily overlay, engineers, architects tend to flip between the two. But for some reason, a lot of people, even going back to recruitment of them, people say, oh, you need to have experience in one or the other. And you'll also get that, say, comparing commercial to residential or retail to residential. Now, like using retail as a prime example, I think a lot of people forget that within a lot of retail businesses, they have huge departments of another speciality. So using someone completely made up but a household name, so someone like Ralph Wren will have a huge construction team within them anyway, because they're forever acquiring new shops, renovating the shop, or stands within bigger department stores. Now with something like this going on, like Ralph Wren isn't a company that's going to prosper from a recession, so they're now going to be looking at it thinking, well, we're going to consolidate for X amount of years because our revenue is not going to go up. We're not going to see any return on our investment if we upgrade this store, which basically means that the people that are working for those types of companies now, Ralph Wren are going to be looking at their business and think, oh, how can we make savings? And those types of people will be on essentially the top of the list as employees that could be cut because they're not bringing any income into the business. Now what you've got going on, to give a broader view, is that you've got a whole load of residential guys now that are out of work. You've got a whole load of retail construction workers out of work now, and then they all need work. So what happens is that the people that have got work, so say like people that are working for Amazon or Tesco's, now you've got a whole load of subcontractors, professionals, all needing to find work, and they're all obviously going to hover, you know the expression I'm going to use, like flies to shit, to where the work is, which essentially is going to drive costs way down. And that, so if someone was earning 50k before a recession, now everyone's competing over the same project, and it's more likely that you're going to earn, say, close to 30k now, because the competition is so fierce just to get the work that is out there. And that's essentially one of the things that go on. So even if you are able to maintain your job, a lot of people will see pay cuts, whether they work for themselves or they work for other companies, just to make ends meet, because that's what happens. And even look at bigger functions within businesses. If a business folds, you've got so many different functions within that business that are seen throughout loads of businesses. So you've got like accounting and marketing are in most companies or most big companies. So you're going to have, again, waves of those staff coming out of their current jobs and looking for new positions, which means that companies can afford to, that are still doing okay, they can afford to offer lower wages. And that's definitely something that happened to me in terms of that. I think I took probably somewhere in a 50% pay cut from sort of pre-recession, recession, that business going and finding a new job. And I don't think that's something to get hit up on, in terms of that you have to remember that it's ups and downs, and it will come back up again, and you will earn more money than you've earned. You're just going to have to dig in. But what I'm trying to demonstrate is a realization of something that goes on, in terms of that it's not just businesses going out of business. You've got then big pools of people or professionals all looking at the same positions. So competition for places is going to be much higher. You probably start to see that a lot of websites tell you how many people have applied for a job. And at the minute, say it may read that 15 or 20 people apply for a job. Well, in the months to come, it'll probably be more like 150 to 250 people have applied for that job. So it's going to get competitive out there, and wages will go down. Just so it's not all doom and gloom. Not everybody will experience a recession. Before filming, I looked on some job posts to see what current people were hiring in construction, and Ocado and Amazon came up. Obviously, anyone in home delivery at the minute is experiencing a huge boom, struggling to meet demand. And like I said before, these types of companies have gained members that just aren't going to leave after everything settles down. Once people have experienced the benefits, that maybe were, oh, I don't know how to do it, or that type of situation, they're not going to leave now that they've signed up and experienced the benefits. So those companies will have grown through this and they will continue to grow. So they will keep hiring and that. So just on the advice on that aspect of it, think about which companies would have prospered out of what's going on and think about looking at those positions out. Look at the industries that have grown. If you're in college or in university and that, probably think about, you've probably got enough time that things will fix themselves by the time you come out. But it's also advice in terms of that I will 100% give Maddie, my daughter, in terms of the potentially avoid these industries because they've got such historic issues with recessions, and it is tough. It's 100% tough. Like I definitely, being perfectly honest, do not want Maddie to go into construction. It's a very, very turbulent industry, and that's essentially why I want to do this video, in terms of that there's no point in me preaching one thing to Maddie and saying something completely different to you guys. But I also don't think that anybody that is passionate about construction or any industry, regardless of its turbulence, like, you've got to remember that a good chunk of people, like, I don't know exactly what percentages are, but 70-80% of people are going to keep their jobs and they're going to keep going. And that, so it is a small percentage of people that will get impacted. Wages probably will get cut for a lot of people, more than the stat I just said. So if you are passionate about it and it is something you want to do not be put off by something like this. It's a blip. It's exactly like life. It goes up and down. But in general, we start off at a lower point and we get to a higher point. It's just not like that. It's a bit like that. And that's what the economy's like. It's no different than what it's like in life. So I feel like I've done construction to death, but the reason why I wanted to do construction to death is obviously I've got some stories I can tell of my experiences during it, but also it's a really good example of how most companies aren't just one function. I think people just in, not necessarily laziness, but just obviously a lack of understanding or a lack of knowledge and understanding that these big companies have so many staff in different sectors, which actually are a completely different business. Like someone like Tesco's will employ hundreds of construction staff. I'm sure Amazon probably do as well. So, and that's the thing to remember, that when people start sort of hating on companies for making too much money, or they made 50 million and that, they may have spent $1 billion to get 50 million in profit. Like, but the papers will just run, oh, they made 50 million and they're not paying their suppliers. Like, they may be on the brink of going bust. Like, please be careful on what you read in media, particularly for a recession, because you have to remember, for those guys, it's all about selling papers, getting people to watch, rather than putting out positivity and that we all need to help each other. And that's something that I'm sure that the companies that are like thriving out of this, everyone will try and do their best to employ as many people. If anyone's watching who's an employer that isn't going to get affected by this, my number one message to you would be that all these stupid things that get put on job postings about having experience in this industry. So say, like, using project management as an example, right? Project managers from one industry to the other, and that it is probably something like a 98 to 99% overlap. Now, if you put in your job posting that you're only interested in someone coming into that sector because they need 5 years or 10 years experience in your sector, so going back to my example of retail versus residential, that please relax those types of standards, that because it's not going to take a project manager long to get to grips with the differences between the two industries. You have to remember that over 95% of subcontractors are exactly the same, and the differences, so to give an example, someone like Tesco's will have tons of refrigeration, which just isn't in residential projects. For someone who's been a project manager for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, it's not going to take them long to learn that aspect of the business. So I implore people that aren't going to get affected by the recession to relax those stupid standards on your applications, asking for people that have that experience, because it kind of is on you guys to help everybody else out that is affected. You're in the prosperous position of not having to be worrying about paying your mortgage, that type of stuff. So I think you should do your bit in relaxing standards and helping people make the transition out of a more difficult industry into an easier, or into an industry that isn't suffering, rather than well, that's your problem, guys. And I think that's my message in general, that everyone should help everybody. Moving on to the next industry, it's the travel industry. So travel industry can be anything from like airlines, airports, hotels. Airbnb are a good one. You may have seen in the news that the value of their company has dropped by 58%, which is a crazy amount of money. Now, a lot of you will look at that and go, yeah, but Airbnb can cope with that loss in valuation. But again, you're only looking at a surface level picture of that. So what you've got to remember is that Airbnb themselves are only a booking service. They literally take a fee. So it'll be quite easy for them to adjust their business to suit drops in volume. But who supplies the properties to Airbnb? What you've got with Airbnb is tons of smaller companies that have bought properties purely for the use of something like Airbnb. But the other big thing that Airbnb does that everyone really forgets is that tons and tons of pensioners have bought properties for the purpose of using on Airbnb. You've got to remember that properties got more and more harder to earn good returns on because it's essentially saturated. Rent levels have stayed stale for a long time. So Airbnb gave a lot of people opportunities to earn more money back on their properties, which means that tons of people took their pensions and invested in property for the purpose of Airbnb. Now, if Airbnb are going to take a big hit, or people using Airbnb just aren't going to use it as much, they're going to take a huge hit on those properties. And if they can't make ends meet, then a couple of things are going to happen, with the major one being that people forget is that the guys that are currently, and girls that are currently retired, that were living off of those estates that they built up, they're going to be back in the workplace. But just like I explained before in terms of with sectors shutting down, well, when things like Airbnb take a big hit, Airbnb, like I said, is just a function of booking something. The guys who have put their hard-earned cash, the little people, in using it as a pension pot to live off of, they're now not making ends meet, so they're going to have to re-enter the industry, which is again going to make it even more competitive. Here's another live example of something that's going on in the travel industry. One of my friends works for Etihad. He's had his wages cut immediately. I've done that across the whole company. He works in the property department for Etihad. Obviously, think about it that Etihad fly around the world. They need office spaces and accommodation around the world, because obviously pilots, air stewardesses and air stewards need places to stay. So he's been responsible, along with his team, for looking for those properties, renewing leases, that type of thing. But he'll now be like panicked about what the future is going to hold, because people like airlines are not going to be expanding in the next few years. And as I said before, a lot of companies are going to be looking through their cash flows, through their budgets, and working out in terms of what arm of the business is bringing money in and what arm of the business is costing money. And that's where he's the same as me in terms of that we graduated in 2007. It felt like we had literally 5 minutes of getting our feet under the table in terms of like transitioning from uni to working life and getting to grips with the work, and obviously had the rug pulled from under our feet. So that's why he actually initially moved to Dubai, then Abu Dhabi, because he lost his job over here. At the time, a lot of people remember this in terms of that Dubai or the Emirates was hiring in a big way. So he made that transition across over there. And that's another thing that you'll see in terms of that some countries will get less impacted than others. Now, that's actually a lot less likely. So before the last session, a lot of people predicted that the way that the world had grown, that we weren't going to get impacted by other countries. So for example, if America was to fall, that the UK would be fine, that we were our own bubble, we wouldn't get impacted by it, and vice versa. If the UK was to, or Europe was to collapse, America wouldn't be. Trust me, that is not the case, and it wasn't the case last time in terms of as much as we may not want to admit it, the reality is in terms of the whole thing you would have heard before, 60 degrees of separation, we are all interconnected with each other. So prime example is that if I use China at the minute, some people are focusing on the fact that China at the minute will be sending out tons and tons of face masks to the rest of the world, and that they'll miscorrectly see that in terms of that China is profiting from like selling face masks back to like Europe and America, and what I mean by the misunderstanding is that that's one sector. Do you think that every factory in China makes masks? No, they don't. There'll be tons of businesses within China that you've got to remember, like China's economy is built on exporting, and that. So while the rest of us are suffering, they will be suffering just like us. Because think about it, I don't know exactly, but obviously a lot of top brands, like sort of sportswear brands, manufacture all their clothing in China. If they're not selling as much clothing, then obviously it's not going to be fueling their economy. So that's an easy example of how we're all intertwined with each other, whether we like it or not. So going back to my friend that works at Etihad, he'll obviously now be looking at his expenses and looking at things that he can cut. The things like gym memberships, eating out, any like small things in terms of that can bridge that gap between what he was earning to what he's earning now, he'll be looking to do, which is this big domino effect I said before. Yeah, so just on the emotional side of that, like it's really important that in tough times, please don't do your best not to get jealous or bitter towards people that are able or aren't affected and able to keep their lifestyles going, because that's another reason why a lot of people will curb their spending, like, and which again just makes things worse and will mean that things last a lot longer. Jealousy is a terrible trait to have. I've never suffered with it. I've always been a big believer that you have to play the cards you're dealt. Otherwise, if you focus too much on other people, you're never going to move forward yourself. So remember that when people are buying a new car or anything like that, we're able to do something that you were able to do but you're now not able to do. Just see it as they're actually doing a good thing, and that, say with the car, that they're keeping your local dealership in business and keeping people going and feeding their families, because that's what this is all about. I can't emphasize enough that it's all about everybody helping each other through these times. Which leads me on to the last section, and probably the one that I'm most worried about, which is the high street. Now, the high street's been in decline for a number of years now, and I'm sure a lot of people have got the opinion that, or if it's been in decline, sort of what's the point in salvaging it, that it was heading that way anyway. But what you've got to remember is that a lot of businesses are in transition of building their online presence versus their in-store presence. So they're kind of in this limbo stage in terms of that they're getting revenue from both, but the overall profit that they're making is probably propping up the whole business. Now, for something that's going on at the minute where most of us are in lockdown and all the stores are shut, this essentially could kill that transition off and kill the whole business off, and potentially so much of the high street, which people will point to, yeah, but things that are in the high street will still be fine, like coffee shops like Starbucks and all those types of guys will be fine. They will and they won't, because what you got to remember is that people still do use the high street and go there. So people having the ability to pop into Starbucks will be fewer and fewer because there's not those pulls. So, for example, if your Marks and Spencer's isn't local anymore, that store's been pulled, which is something I remember happening last time, then that's a whole tranche of those types of customers now that won't be going to the local coffee shop. And that's how the high street works, in terms of that we're not all visiting the same store. Things like coffee stores, they will keep running, absolutely. I can't see people subsiding their caffeine fix anytime soon, but their numbers will definitely get affected. But the other thing you've got to remember as well is that if it all switches to online super quick, then offshoring will happen super quick as well. And that, which fundamentally means that while our government's taken out an enormous loan to subsidise the economy, obviously we've got to pay that back somehow over the coming years. But if we've offshored, and tons of businesses have offshored themselves, so you've got two things going on there. They could offshore the people within the business, which means that essentially we're not going to get any of the tax that staff in the UK would bring to it, so we're losing money out of the economy that way. Or whole businesses, in terms of will move, and we've often seen, the news loves to make thing of like tax havens. Like, people will move to they move their headquarters out of this country if their online presence, if the high street dies and they're just surviving off their online presence. So that's one of the things that I think that people need to be careful about when they sort of want to hate on the high street, that it's going to have a huge impact on the amount of tax that the government can bring in and help to pay back, which basically just means that everybody in the country will be taxed one way or another, whether it means that our income tax goes up or they come up with other means in terms of paying it back. If we lose money out of the economy, they're going to have to get it from somewhere. There's no two ways about it. I think one of the arguments that's been pointed towards the government for a few years now is business rates, in terms of actually trying to help the high street out. The business rates are way too high. They were developed in times when the high street was the number one place to purchase on. Again, the difficulty there is going to be that, well, if they deplete that, halve it, or take it away for a period of time, it's all going to add to this injection of cash that is currently being provided. So, like I said at the beginning of this video, like, I'm not an economist, and if I'm honest, I would not want to make these decisions, but it is going to be a catch-22 that the government are in terms of what they do with all these sectors, because they are indirectly propping up so many different sectors that, like I said, with business rates, in terms of that could be something to help out a ton of businesses in this time. But that wipeout of income that it generates for the government, it's going to have to come from somewhere. So someone's got to come up with an idea of how we do that. And similarly, like I said, with Help to Buy and construction, it's been propping the industry up for years. If they take it away now, when times are already going to get tough, then construction will absolutely be brought to its knees very, very quickly. So it's going to be interesting times, 100%. Just start to end on a few positive points, in terms of one that you'll think is completely random. Like when we've been taking our daily exercise, we've been taking Mads, we've got a forest sort of just over the road from our house, and she's just gotten into climbing. But one of the things that she keeps doing is that she'll see an obstacle that's like 5 or 10 meters away, and she'll tell me in terms of like, oh daddy, I can't get past this bush. Like, I know in terms of that it's only a little bush, it's just a twig, you only got to move it or step over it. And I keep saying to her in terms of, well, get closer to it and you can work it out. And I think that's one of the things that you're going to have to see with the recession. It's no point in panicking about it. Like, all we can do is get to the point where it hits, see what impact it's going to have on us, and then we can start making decisions, start making moves and plans on how to counteract with it. I think the other big thing is that I've seen a lot of posts at the minute in terms of there's a trend of like mental health care, people checking in on each other during these times. I think that's the number one thing to do when we hit a recession. Make sure you check in on all your friends and family, and not just like, hey, how are you, like on a message, in terms of like, I mean, call them. Remember, money is one of the biggest things that most of us keep to ourselves, that we're all very, very proud about. I think just think about the primate aspect of it, in terms of the like, as parents, obviously our number one job is to care for our little ones, or care for our other halves, and vice versa. So the minute that we're unable to do that, I think it kills a big like side of your sort of personality and your soul. And I think a lot of people will see that as like they're failing their loved ones, which I think is like very, very dangerous sort of mindset to get into. So I think it's so important to keep checking in with people. I can remember that massively in the last one, in terms of that I really bonded with a couple of my friends in terms of that did that with me, and I would do that with them, because it is going to get tough. Like, there's no two ways about that. But like I said, in terms of that, everything's so much more enjoyable when everyone's helping each other out. And I think that's the one thing you will see come out of a recession, in terms of that people will want to help. I've seen with our local gym at the minute, like, he'll definitely be panicking, there's no two ways about it, but he's been posting every day about businesses, like local businesses that they work with, and he's even done shout outs in terms of like, send me your local business so I can give you a shout out. I mean, they've got relatively, I think it's like 3,000 to 4,000 Instagram followers, but those are the types of things that everybody's going to need to do in terms of that, try and keep everybody going. It's so important to help everybody out. Don't see people as competition. I think that's a very dangerous thing that can happen as well. So what you got to remember in times that come up is that, using two gyms as an example, right? You got two gyms and they see each other as competition in terms of, well, if they go, then we're going to prosper. Absolute bullshit way of looking at life. they are most likely, or they're in the most similar situation that you're in, and honestly, you would be far better off talking to each other in terms of what your experiences are, because if anybody's going through the struggles you're going through, it's someone who's trying to manage a business very similar to yours. So it's such a waste of energy wishing bad upon someone else because you may prosper from it. You're far better off picking up the phone and actually having a chat with them in terms of that, oh, this is tough. Yeah, it's really tough, because they're going through what you're going through, and they're probably one of the only people that actually can have that experience with you. Like I find this with what we're doing now in terms of that we're obviously only relatively new to YouTube, but I don't have any like friends in YouTube, and I think it would help us, or help me massively in terms of that, just to chat to somebody else in this sector in terms of that, how do you do this, or how do you do that, and what's your experience of this? Because finding people that are in or going through the same thing as you, I think, is massively important. So definitely do not hate on people and businesses in terms of that, because you'll get some sort of prosper out of it. It's a terrible way of being, and I'm a big believer in karma. I just don't think that sending that type of energy out into the world is worth anyone's time and effort. There'll be a ton of opportunities that come out of this. This is something that I saw in the droves in the last recession. All the underappreciated staff in terms of that are currently working for an idiot boss that doesn't appreciate them, but secretly does, in terms of that a lot of bosses know the guys that bring in the cash, or the girls that bring in the cash to the business, but have suppressed them for a number of years, try and knock their confidence because they don't want them to go elsewhere. That those businesses may not make it, which basically means that those top guys and girls in those companies that are actually probably responsible for a lot of the sales that company does, they'll be forced into a situation of starting their own thing, whereas they would probably have always been risk averse had the current situation and stayed the same. They will now step out of the shadows as such, and they will start their own businesses, and they'll be hugely successful. And I've known so many people that did that in the last recession, and a few of them become millionaires as well off the back of it. So keep an eye out in your companies in terms of keep an eye out in your company. And that person may not be you in terms of that is going to step out of the shadow, but there may be other people within that company you think, do you know what, I really think they're going to do something, and see if you can get yourself involved with that company that comes out of it.
Who's coming with me? Who's coming with me? Who's coming with me?
The other thing is that, like I said before, in terms of the people like Amazon, Ocado, they're all going to prosper this situation. So keep your eyes posted. I don't want to sort of, my next bit of advice, which is probably why I've sort of stalled a little bit, is that, because I don't want to do recruiters out of money, but the thing is that you probably want to, a bit of advice is that to actually look at their websites. Because at the end of the day, when times are tough, people will cut their income. Cut their spending, and that's if you can go through directly on their website, obviously they're not going to be paying a fee to recruiters on top of that. The reason why I'm sort of loath to say that is that recruiters obviously are going to suffer in the next couple of years, depending on how long this recession lasts. But at the same time, this channel's been built around the audience and wanting to help people. So I think it's important for me to, it's something that I would do, it's something that I would tell my family and my friends to do. So I'm telling you to do it in terms of that, if you can apply direct to the company's websites, that you know that, like I just said, like Amazon and Ocado, because they will be saving circa 15%. So using easy numbers, if it's a job for 50 grand, they'll be saving, say, $7,500 in paying a fee to a recruitment agent. So quite often you can lose, you can think a job interview went really well, and in the background you may not realise it's that, well, the person you're up against may be someone that the company knows or have come through directly from their website. So I don't want anyone to sort of lose the opportunity to get in with a company just because they didn't go through the company. So definitely do that. Like I said, a lot of the opportunities will come out of this. There'll be tons of new companies starting. You may be transitioning. like, I want to do a separate video on this in terms of working for businesses where compared to working for small businesses. It may just be a situation now where you're going to step out of a big company and go and work for a little company, and you will love it. I promise you, in terms of that, I find working for a small company is so much more interesting than working for a big company. In a big company, nothing against big companies, but you obviously fulfill a function of a very big organization, so you do something very small. In a small company, it'll be like learning your job all over again. Probably 50-60% of your time will be spent on something you actually have got expertise on, and 40% of it would be spent on stuff that you're like, why am I doing this? I don't know how to do this at all. There'll be a learning curve, but it's fun. Like, when things are little and everything matters, you'll really, really enjoy it. So again, do not be afraid to jump from a 10,000 person company to a 5-person company. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot more intimate. It can be a little bit more inappropriate because there's no like HR department and that type of stuff, but you can fall out with people and 10 minutes later you're back chatting to them. Whereas I think in bigger companies you can kind of avoid each other for months at a time rather than getting on. So see it as an opportunity. I think you really enjoy that side of it. Like I said, there'll be tons of new companies starting up. Some companies will go bust and the owners of those companies will start up again. There'll be so many opportunities like that, and the new company they form may have actually a way better chance of doing well than the old company, in terms of that you can correct a lot of wrongs when you start again. So that they may have grown the business and been looking at it and think, oh, do you know what, we shouldn't have hired these people, or we shouldn't have gone in that direction, that was a complete mistake. And actually pressing the reset button, while it's extremely stressful in terms of that, that's another thing. If you know anyone that's sort of losing their business or having to close their business down, make sure you send a lot of well wishes to those people, because it's so stressful letting people go. It goes back to the advice I gave earlier in terms of the people feeling like failures. So imagine in your family, if you can't provide for your family anymore, most business owners see their companies as family. So by not being able to provide like for their employees anymore, it hits them really, really hard. So please make sure that you reach out to those guys as often as you can. Try and meet up with them. Meeting up is way more personal than just sending a text. I almost think that text is pointless. You know what we all do, and everyone else no different in terms of, yeah, I'm fine. And a lot of time it won't be fine, and just having 20 minutes, half an hour to vent the situation and sharing your story can often make you feel 100 times better. I'm going to end the video with a quote that I saw on Christian Guzman's video the other day, which we'll see in the outro, which I think is a great analogy for a perspective on the current situation. If you have got some value out of the video, please share, like, subscribe. Massively helps us out. And if you've got any advice, like, whack it down in the comment section. Like I said, like, I want this channel to be about sharing advice and experiences. It's not about, if you disagree with anything, I'm fine, like, whack it down in the comments. That's absolutely fine. But what I want to do is have people share their experiences and advice. And if you're one of the lucky people that doesn't experience a recession, and trust me, there's tons of people that if you ask them about the last recession, they'll say, oh, it's just business as usual, because they weren't impacted by it. Now, if you're one of those people, what I would say is that make a concerted effort to give people work experience, to give up your time, like just like with Career Insights, in terms of where professionals are giving up their time, tell people about their roles, how they got into it, tips and advice, then like please try and do stuff like that, because obviously there's going to be a huge number of students, and it's something that happened with my generation, that obviously I did a construction related degree, and tons of people that I graduated with never set foot in construction. There just weren't enough jobs to go around, and that's why earlier in the video I implored people that are hiring to look outside of the box rather than standard box, because tons of people will be out of work, and tons of them will have potential to pivot. They've only done a degree, like, for God's sake. And I think the thing with a degree is that, like, at the time when you're doing it, just to all the students, you think that you've learned a lot and you're in a way better foundation for stepping foot into the workplace. Trust me, like, you probably like learned something that's maybe it's less than 5% in terms of what is going to be beneficial to your work until you start working, start your projects, whatever the job may be. That's when the real learning curve starts, and it's going to be like that. So I don't really think it matters in terms of that. If you've done a degree, I think Joe's a prime example of that. She did health and science. She now works for like a financial data company. I implore people to have that view, that take a chance on people, interview people that don't have CVs that meet the stupid list of criteria that you've put out there. Definitely relax on like graduate applications in terms of getting left field applications, and invest time in helping people that haven't got a job, in terms of whether you can get them even like work experience, in terms of that it all helps people's CVs and helps people understand how industries work. So it's going to be about a lot of helping. I've spoken for way too long. Hopefully this gets edited in a way that helps everybody and makes some sense. Thank you so much for watching. Smash the like button and subscribe button if you can. It does really help us out. And see Christian Guzman's quote that we borrowed on the outro. See you next time.